Hello, and welcome to another episode of Be a Leader podcast, where we talk about leadership issues in sports, military, and business. Before I start, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year's, depending on when you're watching this. So today we are going to talk about the first round of college football playoffs, things that we can learn from it. Yes, it's easy to talk about the sports. You can see all the sport commentators on that, but we're going to talk about it from a leadership perspective because there's a lot of stuff to talk about in the college football playoffs in the first round within leadership. So the first one we're going to talk about are the two blowouts. So there's 4 games. 2 were just big blowouts. We're going to talk about those first. So the 2 games were Ole Miss versus Tulane and Oregon versus James Madison. So Ole Miss is an SEC team from the Southeastern Conference, and Oregon's from the Big Ten. They're blowouts. They turned out 41-10, Ole Miss over Tulane, and then 51-34, Oregon over James Madison. James Madison just scored some easy points at the very end of the fourth quarter when the game was a complete blowout. So the first thing I want to talk about is James Madison Tulane. I give a lot of respect to them. Their coaches prepared them. The teams played hard all those games. They had great seasons. They were conference champions. The whole reason they were there was, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but there was kind of like, we want to be more inclusive and bring in other conferences, not just the SEC or the Big Ten. So that's how they were allowed to come in. They weren't even ranked in the top 12 because there's 12 teams in the playoffs this year, but they were included in this to be more inclusive. But the teams did their jobs. Tulane and James Madison, both coaches came out, prepared their teams. They worked hard. They played hard the whole time. Like, they prepared themselves as best as they possibly could. And that's why it's a leadership issue here. Not on them, on the selection committee. The selection committee failed on them. Football is a different sport than basketball. I was a better football player than I was basketball, but I ended up working with John Beeline at Michigan. So I coach basketball now. I've been coaching for many years. But football is really dependent on size and talent and athleticism. And so within their conference, they did great. Within their non-conference, they did great. They were conference champions, both teams. They should have been playing teams in bowl games that they could have won. All right, they could have been competitive. But these games were not competitive because the SEC and the Big Ten teams that were there, they were just completely different levels of talent and athleticism. Okay, it's just they had no chance to win. And that's why it's a tough position for James Madison and Tulane. They did everything they could, but they were not set up for success. They should never have been included. And that's why I say this is the selection committee's fault. They're the ones put blame on these games. And what was the cost of them doing this? Well, one, the games were very boring. I did watch all 4 games. Those games were so boring, especially the one late at night, the Oregon James Madison. It was just so painful to watch it. I felt so bad for James Madison on that. They were boring games. They were painful for the players and the coaches. They could have ended their season like I mentioned. They had great seasons. They were conference champions. They should have gone to a bowl game with someone comparable. That maybe they should have played each other. That could have been a great bowl game. Okay, but it was painful for them. It was, I don't know how you evaluate the season after that, because that's all you had, the sour taste in your mouth. You made the college football playoffs, but you had no chance to win. It's painful. It took spots from other teams that deserved to get in, most notably Notre Dame. And I talked about Notre Dame's leadership issues in the last video, how they should have. That's another video, so watch that if you want to hear my take on Notre Dame's challenges of leadership. But they should have been in this bowl, this selection committee. They should have been part of it. It took spots from teams that deserved to be there. And it just made the schedule longer. We'll talk about the schedule a little bit here in a moment. But it was just, the costs are real. And it's so easy to overlook as leaders that make these decisions. But the costs are real. They were too focused on inclusion in this by including Tulane and James Madison in the college football playoffs. They're too focused on that. Inclusion without competence is not leadership. They cared way too much about including as many conferences as they could. I think they wanted 5 or 6 in this thing. Right? They were too focused on that. And that's where inclusion replaced leadership. In my time in the Marine Corps, okay, inclusion is not the end state. It's not the end game. It's mission accomplishment. At the very beginning, you bring as many people as you can, and you train them, and you train them, and you train them. But standards are there for a reason. You either make the standard or you don't. And if you're below the standard, it's not going to work. You got to move on. For with those that can meet the standard, you keep pushing, keep training, and that's how you do it. From leading civilians into Marines, very wide, right? Very inclusive. Everyone who shows up. And then go to Marines, and they become specialists, from riflemen to specialists. And then the specialists, they get in teams. And the teams, they prepare pre-deployment, and then deployment, and then you're out in the battlefield. But it becomes more and more and more and more narrow. And at the end, you should have a very focused, united team. That's how you go at the end to have the best chance of survival to accomplish the mission in the battlefield. And instead of being very focused, the selection committee went wide. Mission failure. I would say the selection committee failed in selecting their 12 teams and making this a competitive college football playoff. Failure on this point alone. So let's talk now on another subject on the schedule. And I say this again from a head manager, Michigan basketball, Big Ten. I worked for John Beilein, a college basketball Hall of Fame coach. And there were no rules for me. So I'm saying this from being in the inside. Okay. The basketball players, they have rules. 20 hours. Sure, it's with coaches. They spend more time maybe lounging around or eating and those type of things. But 20 hours is what they are. They're limited. 20 hours. And with me, there was no rules. Right. So I would spend 60 to 70 hours a week working with the basketball team. And because I didn't get housing, I didn't get stipends. I also worked at the Chow Hall as a cook to make money to pay for my room and board. And so I was working about 90 hours a week, every week, because there were no rules for me. But with the challenge here is when you have this 12 playoff system, it's about 6 weeks. And it's a lot of time. And I understand the student athletes are not paid student athletes, but the impact on the student athletes is real. And the impact on the student managers, student trainers, all those other ones that volunteer, that work in the office, that do all the other work in the background that you don't see. There's a bunch of students that run these things. It impacts them. The impact on the students is real. And we know it's only going to get bigger. They seem to solve a problem. They keep wanting to solve a problem a bit bigger, more and more and more. It's already long. 6 weeks is long. And it's only going to get worse. That's not the solution. And that's what I'm going to throw in my idea for the college football playoffs. I think the best plan should be 8 teams. That way, you have 3 weeks. You have quarterfinal, semifinal, and final. 3 weeks. March Madness does 3 weeks with 68 teams. College football can do 3 weeks with 8 teams. The other part here is the best teams should be included. The best, at the end of the season, the best top 8 teams should be included in the selection. We already talked about the inclusion. It doesn't work well. Get the best 8 teams, regardless of their conference. This is going to be very clean. It's going to be very competitive. It's going to be very compact. And it's going to be very much good. It's going to be a good product. That's my recommendation. Probably ain't going to happen. We're just going to make it bigger and bigger to make more money. Leaders build systems. And if you don't in your leadership position, then you're creating a system of chaos. Okay. But we do create systems, whether intentional or unintentional. And in the Marine Corps, that's all we do. Again, I talked about earlier, you're taking a civilian into a Marine war fighter, being ready for war, being ready for battlefield, being ready to protect our country. We build systems. And if those systems aren't protecting your people with boundaries, then you're failing as a leader. I've seen it many times when I work with other units. Maybe they're Army units or other units. These leaders would be doing 24-hour operations, and they can't hang. After 3 days, guys are falling asleep or dragging on the floor. You have to learn how to flip-flop. In the Marine Corps, we train so much. We know we have an A and a B. To be the officer and the senior enlisted, constantly flipping, 12 out, 12 off, shadowing each other, helping each other out. But you can't just run dry and dead. That doesn't work well. When you refuse to do boundaries, someone's going to pay. And the ones that pay are going to be the ones with the least amount of power. And in this case, again, I understand these student athletes are paid, but there's so many students that support, whether it's the student managers, student trainers, student equipment guys, student whatever, the office people. There's a bunch of people that pay, but the student athletes still pay. Okay, sure, their staff people and their families pay. It's gone way too far. It's a second season. We shouldn't have a second season. So I ask you the question, especially if you're in a leadership position. What boundaries are you refusing to put up that are impacting your people, especially the ones with the least amount of power, the smallest voice? They might not even say anything, but you're impacting it, and it is a system that you're creating. So let's learn from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. That needs a lot of work. And remind ourselves that we have the power as leaders to set up systems. What are our systems creating? All right, let's talk about the other 2 games. We're going to start with Alabama and Oklahoma. So Alabama went to Oklahoma, and it was a very intense game at the beginning. It was in Norman, Oklahoma. Lots of energy. It was a spectacular start. Oklahoma was on fire. They were up 17-0. And you would have thought, man, they're just going to cruise. Alabama didn't even deserve to be in here. They were the first 3 lost team to be in. And they just looked like they were cruising. And it was interesting watching Alabama because they were just they didn't panic. They just kind of went to the next play and went to the next play and tried again and tried again. And at some point, they got a break. We're always looking for a break. Right? And in football, the big ones usually are interceptions. And Alabama got an interception off of Oklahoma, and it set them up to score. And from there, they didn't look back. They scored 27 straight points, and Oklahoma tried there at the end, but really, it was all Alabama. Oklahoma collapsed. They were emotional. They collapsed. They were shooting themselves in the foot. They should have won the game, but they collapsed on themselves. Oklahoma was all emotion, no foundation, which is surprising given the coach Venables. Alabama, all fundamentals. They were steady. They were focused. They played it out, knowing that 4 quarters means something, and they won the game. You don't want a hot and cold team. You want a consistent team on the things that are important to you, and Alabama did that. In the Marine Corps, go back to it. We're not built on emotions. We're built on purpose. We're built on mission, and we train that way. And I give Coach DeBoer a lot of credit with Alabama because they looked like they were very much on purpose on trying to play their game, keep going. At some point, they're going to get some breaks, and they did that. And yes, initially I was looking for DeBoer to try to go to Michigan, but that's something different. So good on Alabama. They were consistent. They were on mission. They kept playing. Bad in Oklahoma. They let the emotions all consume them. They shot themselves on the foot. Yeah, I was pretty disappointed in that. But those are the lessons learned on that game. And we're finally going to the 4th game, Miami at Texas A&M. It was in College Station, Texas. And it was a different game, entirely different game than the Oklahoma and Alabama game. It was very competitive. It was very defensive oriented. There was no score at halftime. It was very neck and neck. Very good competition. It was a great matchup. At the very end, they both finally started to score, and it got to that point where Miami was just a little bit ahead of the game in terms of points. But Texas A&M had the ball, and they were driving downfield, ready to score and win the game. At the very end, the quarterback threw an interception in the touchdown area, and that ended the game. It would be easy to say A&M choked, or they flopped at the very end. They blew it. Yes, you could say that. But the key, when we talk about leadership, the point of the coaches, every coach, I say this of the head coaches, I am the head coach. The point of every coach is to put your team in a position to win. That's what I was saying. James Madison, Tulane, their coaches did everything they could. Here, I would argue Texas A&M also put their team up in a position to win. This was not a leadership failure from my standpoint. It was an execution failure. They didn't execute the play. And not only did they not execute the touchdown pass, but it got intercepted, which ended the game altogether on one play. Okay, the system worked, but the execution failed on that. Okay, again, this is very different than the Oklahoma collapse. They collapsed emotionally. That's a leadership issue. Here, it's different. Leadership failure, execution failure are very different. What can leaders control? They can control being prepared. They can control your position, your response to situations. That's what leaders can control. They cannot control the outcome. When I think about the Marine Corps, I cannot control the outcome of the mission, but I can prepare. I can train my Marines. I can prepare for a mission. I can rehearse it. We do everything it takes. And then being ready, everyone ready, everything ready, all the gear. The amount of gear we have is outrageous. You don't know unless you live in the Marine Corps, you live in the military, the amount of gear that we have to have prepared. And you go out and you do it, but you cannot guarantee the outcome. That's why we put so much emphasis on the systems that we create beforehand. And as we build up to it, leaders cannot guarantee outcomes. And I think the A&M coach did what he could to get them ready for a position to win. So very different outcome. That leads us to the very end. And we got my whiteboard, my college basketball whiteboard here. Talk about the key points of this video. So the first one, inclusion without competence is poor leadership. We saw that with the selection committee. They really cared more about including as many conferences as they could instead of having the best teams go at it to win the championship. It's poor leadership, and we can learn from it. The second one, real leaders set boundaries to protect their people. Again, going back to the college football playoff committee. All right, we got this about 6 weeks, 12 teams. They're probably going to make it bigger. They need to create a better system that's clean, that's competitive, that's focused. focus is the key. Focus is the key. And I'm going to talk about my masterclass here in a little bit, but focus is the key. And they need to build a better system. And the third one, emotions. Emotion isn't unreliable. Emotions are unreliable. Fundamentals scale under pressure. And we saw that with a few of the games, especially the Oklahoma game. Okay. Emotion is not a tactic. Okay. It is not a tactic. Being good at fundamentals, being as prepared as possible, focusing on the mission, having the purpose, that works. Focus on the fundamentals because that does scale over time. Okay. Those are the key lessons that we have on this video, on this podcast. So as I mentioned, I do want to invite you. I have a masterclass coming up here on how to become the person who follows through in 2026. I use a lot of these elements from the Marine Corps, from college sports, from my time at McKinsey and Company, startups, you name it. I'm bringing it together to help you become the person, because we all have had struggles. We're all here humans. We have stories in our mind. We have emotions. We're trying to deal with things. Maybe next year is the year that I finally do X, Y, Z. Okay, this masterclass will show you the key ingredients you need to finally become that person, to follow through to the thing that's the most important thing to you. Okay, we all have something. And I invite you, it's a free 1 hour masterclass call. You can look at the details in the description, and I invite you to that. So, as we wrap up this episode of Be a Leader, whether you're leading yourself, leading others, or leading leaders, be a leader. My name is Daniel Pinedo. Thank you so much, and until next time.